41,000 years ago, the Neanderthals disappeared, not slowly, not over a few generations. In the geological blink of an eye, one of the most successful species to ever walk Europe was simply gone. For decades, you've been told why. The climate turned against them. Homo sapiens outcompeted them for food. Maybe they just weren't as smart. A new study says all of that is wrong, not partially wrong, not needs more research wrong. The data says the thing that actually killed the Neanderthals had nothing to do with intelligence, weapons, or even the cold. It was something far stranger and far more uncomfortable. In 2026, a team led by anthropologist Ariane Burke at the Université de Montréal did something nobody had tried before. They borrowed a tool from an unrelated field entirely, conservation biology. The kind of modeling normally used to track endangered animal populations, predicting which habitats can keep a species alive and which ones quietly starve it out. They pointed that tool at 60,000 years of European prehistory. The period in question is called Marine Isotope Stage 3, roughly 60,000 to 34,000 years ago, a brutal stretch of climate whiplash. The world swinging between bitter glacial cold and short warm reprieves over and over. Here's the first thing that should stop you. Neanderthals had survived this kind of swing before. Multiple times. They weren't fragile, they weren't primitive, their tools were sophisticated, their bodies were built for cold in ways ours weren't, and the genetic record proves something even stranger. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred, not once, repeatedly, which means in some places, for some amount of time, these were not two species locked in a war. They were neighbors, sometimes more than neighbors. So if it wasn't the cold, and it wasn't a fight, what actually happened? The researchers mapped something most studies never bother to track, not where each species lived, but how well their populations were connected, and the gap they found was staggering. Homo sapiens bands, even spread across hundreds of miles, maintained working relationships with distant groups. The model showed something like a web, overlapping, redundant, constantly exchanging people, information, and resources. Neanderthal bands had networks too. They weren't isolated hermits. But region by region, especially stretching from Western into Southeastern Europe, those connections were thinner, more fragile, easier to break. And the overlap between the two species' territory? The model put it at under 5%. Let that sit for a second. They weren't fighting over the same land. They were barely touching. The competition theory doesn't hold up when the two species occupied almost entirely separate ground. So here's what the data actually suggests happened. When the climate swung hard, and during this period it swung constantly, a Homo sapiens band facing a bad season had options. They could lean on a connected group 2 valleys over, borrow knowledge of where the herds had moved, send a few people to live with allies until conditions improved, find a partner from outside their own small gene pool. A Neanderthal band facing the exact same crisis had far fewer of those options. Their network didn't reach as far or hold as firm. When the shock hit, there was no safety net to catch them. One researcher described these networks almost like a kind of infrastructure, invisible but load-bearing. You don't notice it until the moment of crisis, when one species had a bridge to lean on and the other had a gap. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. It means Neanderthals weren't erased because they were weaker animals. They were erased because they were more alone. And it didn't happen everywhere the same way. In places like the Iberian Peninsula, where Neanderthal populations happen to sit at better connected core regions, they appear to have held on longer. The pattern isn't Neanderthals always lost. It's isolation. Wherever it existed was the vulnerability, which means the difference between surviving an ice age and disappearing from the fossil record may have come down to something as simple as how many other groups you could call on when things went wrong. Not muscle, not tools, not brain size, bridges between people. And here's the part almost nobody connects to this study, but that the researchers themselves pointed at directly. 40,000 years later, this still applies to you. We like to imagine survival as an individual trait. The strongest person, the smartest person, the most self-sufficient person makes it through. That's the story we tell ourselves about who thrives and who doesn't. But the species that's still here, the one writing studies about the one that didn't outsurvive the Neanderthals by being tougher. It outsurvived them by being more connected, by building wider webs of people to fall back on when the environment turned hostile and unpredictable. That's not a coincidence buried in 60,000-year-old data. That's a pattern. And patterns like that don't expire. Right now, more people report feeling isolated than at almost any other point on record. We've built lives that are, in a sense, extremely well-equipped and extremely disconnected. Full resources, thin networks. Sound familiar? The Neanderthals weren't lacking in intelligence. They weren't lacking in resilience as individuals. What they lacked was reach, the invisible web that turns a crisis into something survivable instead of something fatal. So the next time you hear someone say isolation isn't really a problem, remember that an entire species spent hundreds of thousands of years proving that exact theory wrong. The climate didn't kill the Neanderthals. Isolation did, and it's been quietly auditioning for the same role in our species ever since.